Hey everyone, this is Zero X Wing, and you're watching the runebase.org podcast. On this podcast, I have the pleasure of talking with the developers, entrepreneurs, and community members of the THORChain ecosystem. And today, I had the pleasure of chatting with none other than Chad Barraford, the lead developer of THORChain. And this is a conversation that was a long time coming. I've been a long time admirer and fan of Chad's. I finally had a chance to get Chad on the show. We had a great conversation about his story and background. We talked about what is THORChain and how the vision for THORChain has evolved from the early days. We talked about the future for THORChain, including all the different primitives and all the different protocols that are going to be built on top of THORChain over time, and how that will lead to multiple income streams for THORChain liquidity pools. We talked about the news and events from today. Literally just today, the Ethereum chain and ERC20 assets were re-enabled on THORChain and the implications of that going forward. And we talked about what some of the future holds for THORChain. So it was a very exciting and fun conversation. We get to connect with the man who's down in the trenches building this protocol. Chad, thank you so much for spending the time with us. It was a pleasure to chat with you. Guys, if you like what you hear, definitely hit us with a like or subscribe on YouTube or subscribe on your podcast app of choice. Everything helps us reach a broader audience in the ecosystem. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the inside. Peace. So today I had the pleasure of talking with a man who needs no introduction, the OG, the Giga Chad of THORChain, Mr. Chad Barraford. Is that how you pronounce your last name? Did I get that right?
Barraford is the last name, yeah.
Chad Barraford, thank you for joining us, Chad. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It is absolutely a pleasure, and it's been a long time coming. Let's start with some background. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into crypto and eventually THORChain?
I was living in Boston a few years ago in 2016. That's where I grew up most of my life. I decided to just basically sell everything that I own, or at least the vast majority of it, and just start backpacking around the world, because I'd never really traveled before in my life. And I met these guys in Croatia who were big Ethereum fanatics, and they were talking about Bitcoin, Ethereum, and this new blockchain thing. I was like, whoa, this is kind of interesting. And so I actually was traveling with them for quite a while. And while we were in Lisbon, I started to build a blockchain from scratch. It's literally home roll it from nothing, an entire chain, because I really want to understand how the technology actually functions. And a great way to learn how something works is actually just build it yourself, from nothing. And doing so, I was just like, wow, this is one of the most revolutionary technologies the world has ever seen. I mean, to me, it's just as high as airplanes and cars and the internet, that kind of level of innovation that could really reshape humanity. And I really got really excited about this and thinking this is one of the most amazing things. And it's such a baby, such as little tiny thing that really hasn't had time or the people and the money and the capital and the innovation to grow it into this full grown thing. I was this is my opportunity to contribute to the world in a very significant way. I'm head over heels, fully committed, 110%, all in, all my chips. And so that's why in 2017 is when I bought my first Bitcoin, and I started to buy a few other small assets and just started to code and contribute as much as I could to the industry.
That's awesome. And so did you immediately start shipping projects? Did you join other teams? How did your entry point go from being passionate about it and starting to trade to actually working on protocols and applications?
Yeah, in the beginning, I was just trying to get my head around it. In the first few months, I spent just reading as much as I could, and then I started contributing to it. I started to write code a little bit for the Lightning Network. And I opened up I was like, oh, this is a really cool project. This might be worth my time, And so I was like, hey, do you have some space for me? And they were just contribute to the open source project and maybe we'll hire you. And I was like, cool. And so I opened up a couple tiny PRs, double small ones. And it took a year and a half for them to review it, something like this. And so I was just well, this isn't going to work out. And so so then I decided I built a funny little side project that I thought was just kind of interesting idea, and it was a way you can play games and earn Bitcoin online. And it didn't work out very well in the end because the miner that I was using got fucked big time because Monero did a hard fork, and all the mining software just was completely broken. And then I couldn't publicize because at the time Twitter and Facebook just shut down anything crypto related. You couldn't have any marketing whatsoever. They made it all really kind of hard to make that successful in that sense. And I was like, well, that didn't work out. It's time to move on. And so then at that point, I just started to do some freelance work here and there. I actually worked for Binance temporarily as a consultant, kind of helping them to build some things on their chain, which I don't think ever actually got merged to master, so to speak. But, like, hey, we want to, do like a multi-sig and like escrow and like hedged escrow and like these kinds of features on Binance. And so I spent some time like building those things out and like shipping it to them. Like, here you go. Because like the code is not open source for Binance, so I couldn't actually see their code. So I had to like make some other code and then submit it to them, and then like they merge it in. But I don't think they ever actually did though. That's okay. And so I started working on that kind of stuff for a while. I got hired into another project called Sky Network, which is like trying to like decentralize the air traffic control on the blockchain is the simplest way to put it. But then the CEO really wanted to get into this like how about we sell it to governments and governments control it? And I was like, no, like that's a that's a horrible
Antithetical to
idea.
everything we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I get that there's a a business case for this. Like that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But that's like the exact opposite of why I'm in this industry and why I love this industry and why I'm spending all of my time and resources into this, contributing to this space. And so I walked away from that scenario just because we were just going in different directions. Like we just didn't see things in the right way. And so I left that one. And, worked on THORChain pretty much since like July 2019, I think was when I first joined the project. And right where I think the ICO launched like a week after that or something like this.
Nice. So tell me about your first encounter with THORChain. How did you come across it? And did you understand it immediately? Did you understand its implications immediately? What was that first touch like?
Yeah, good question. So what actually happened was, for that Sky Network was the name of that air traffic control blockchain. I was meeting the CEO of that company and one of the advisors to that company. So I was living in Berlin at the time, which is just purely coincidental. And the following week, there was a Cosmos hackathon in Berlin. And it's just like, hey, why don't we just like meet up? Like we're already going to this event and you're like already in Berlin. So like, why don't you just come to the hackathon and like, we'll just like hack for a couple of days and like see how you do. And that'll be like your job interview. Like that was like the intention behind it. Right. And so like, sure, why not? And so like, but at the time I had never like heard about or even used Cosmos at all. And so I was just like, what the hell is this Cosmos thing? So like the day before the hackathon, I just like read through all the documentation. And then like the next day I showed up and like, all right, let's hack on this thing, right? Let's start building, right? And so the advisor to that project, him and I just kind of basically hacked on this thing. Committing effectively was the first lines of code of THORChain, of Thor node, right? What we now know as Thor node. That was like the first lines of code. And at that time, the other person had tried to work on THORChain like a year earlier, but it didn't really work out. Like threshold signature didn't exist yet, and Cosmos didn't really exist quite yet. And like the technology and the cryptography wasn't there, the team wasn't there. But he's kind of said to me, he's like, hey, I had this cool idea I've been hacking on last year, and it's really neat. I already have like the mathematics worked out, like continuous liquidity pools and slip-based fees and like all these things. I'm like, all right, this sounds like a fun thing. And so him and I just kind of hacked on
Sounds easy.
It sounds so easy. I mean, it's very simple. No, it's not. It's actually great.
No, you're kidding.
Yeah. And so we hacked on for 2 days. We ended up winning that hackathon, or one of the winners rather. Got a bunch of free Atom coins, which was fun. And then it just kind of like a week later, there goes the ICO, right? It raised like I think 1.5 million or something like this in investment. And then from that point on, it was just off to the races, and building this thing out.
Was that ICO already planned at the time, or was it like you rolled out of the hackathon and decided to do the ICO at that time?
It was really more of like a rollout of the hackathon and then launch the thing. Because I think at the time, the other person was just like, oh, we tried this idea, it didn't work out. Good idea, but just wasn't there. But then after doing the hackathon with myself and like kind of invigorating new technology and threshold signatures was still relatively new at that time.
Yep.
I think the white paper was like a month earlier or 2 months later, something like this. I could get the right number, but it was like all the kind of the ducks were in a row in a sense. Like the planets had aligned in that particular moment. That like all the technology was there. He had met me to take on a significant role from an engineering and architecture design perspective, and he was like, "Let's just do this thing." And I was just like, "Hell, this is actually a really cool idea because it's solving like a hair on fire problem. It's not like something that's kind of fun and kind of it's like, no, this is actually a significant problem that everybody wants to see solved. I don't care, even if you're like a Bitcoin maxi, you probably want this solved to some degree, right? Like everyone wants to see this thing just solved. And so at that time though, like it really wasn't what it is today. Like at that time, it was like, oh, it'll be kind of like a cross-chain AMM, but it's really kind of shifted it to become like this chain agnostic DeFi network that has a multitude of DeFi protocols. Like that's where THORChain comes in, and like all these other things we might get into later in the convo. But yeah, that was like the very, very, very early stages of it. And then yeah, we started to bring other people into the team shortly after, I think. And then here we are like 2 years later, 2.5, whatever it is now, 2.5 years later. And and we're, the thing's actually running and trading, and like, actually delivered the white paper, and it really works.
And it's like, and it's got transaction volume, seeing like 7-figure a day currently now after the recovery. And it's got a thriving, really passionate community around it. And yeah, it's I agree with what you're saying. Like it wasn't back then what we have today. And I heard you first use this description from your mainnet presentation about like, it's actually a chain agnostic DeFi platform. So I want to talk more about that. But first, let's go back to something else that you just said. So like it's solving a problem that's actually a major issue in this space with a novel solution. What is the problem that's being solved here? And then from that, what is THORChain?
Yeah, so the root of I think what THORChain's solving in a first right is that it's able to build DeFi protocols in a way that it is agnostic to chain, agnostic to asset. Almost every DeFi protocol we have today, almost every single one of them, has some sort of like reliance on a specific ecosystem, right? And that could be Ethereum, that could be Solana, that could be like EOS, that could be, generally some EVM-based chain out in the world. And you can deploy a Uniswap, for example, on Ethereum, and then you can take that smart contract code and deploy it on Binance Smart Chain and fragment the protocol and the liquidity and like all that kind of stuff comes with that. And so like, I think it's what we need to have in this space, where like imperative is that we have systems where it doesn't matter where you're coming from. Like imagine a world where I told you like, hey, we got this cool, thing here, but for some people, like you have to use Google Chrome, right? Like, and some other people, they have to use some like Firefox, right? Like use Google Chrome for like YouTube, and if you want Facebook, you have to download like Safari, and if you want this, you have to download this other thing. It becomes like fragments the hell out of like these online services. Like it's like, why I have to download like 7 different things to get access to different websites, which is just kind of like nonsensical. Like from a first principles perspective, like this is just really fucking stupid. Like it really is really dumb. And so it's just like, well, why don't we just create a website? It doesn't matter like where you're coming from it with a Firefox, or you're coming through with Chrome, or like IE, like whatever. It's all the same. What if that was the thing? And so then it creates this idea that like that the blockchain space is a unified. It's not just like these isolated islands that exist unto themselves and have no relationship or connection to anything else. It becomes like an entire space which you can transact with any asset of your choosing, and that just reshapes the crypto kind of like value proposition to the world in a very significant way, right? So that's really the bread and butter, I think, of what THORChain is doing. Is it's creating these transparent, decentralized bridges between more or less every bridge in crypto, in a way that it can do that with basically every blockchain in crypto. That's pretty significant change. And then all of a sudden, like if you want to transact from one place to another, it's like, who cares? Like go right ahead, like have fun, right? Like it doesn't matter anymore. Like you can go ahead and enter Binance Smart Chain or whatever you want to get to, Ripple, Doge, I don't know, whatever your favorite thing is. No judgment here. That's a very significant shift of the greater crypto sphere. And I think that's what makes me so excited about its potential.
Yeah. And I think like you, I observed this evolution from the initial idea being, liquidity pools that enable cross-chain swaps, trading between different assets across different blockchains.
Yep.
And originally it seemed like that was, if not the extent of the overall vision, that was the extent of what was kind of like the community had eyes on. And then somewhere in the last, year and a half or year, they're understanding that once you have these cross-chain liquidity pools with assets across all these different chains and all the technology to communicate across these chains, all the layers of DeFi that can be built on top of it. When did that transition start to happen? I mean, can you identify where was there a sort of shift where like THORChain became like this part of the vision, or was that always there just waiting to be uncovered?
It definitely wasn't part of the initial programming of it. Like in the first maybe even year, I would say, like we were really just focused on the AMM model and building these bridges, cross-chain bridges, and having all that make sense. But I think what eventually happened was we just kind of like realized that the most difficult part of building THORChain is so much the liquidity pools and the cross-chain aspect to it. Like that you connect all these things. But once you have all those things, the actual like code that does the actual swapping, like the actual like swap logic itself, it's like probably not even 1% of the code base. Like it's very, very small, like in terms of its complexity. It's actually rather like very small. And so it's like, well, if you can do the swap logic with this little tiny bit of code, right? Why can't you do lending, right? And that's like, again, that's probably going to be a very small amount of code relative to what the greater code base is. And so like we've solved a difficult problem that nobody else really had solved previously. And I even like remember having conversations with I don't want to say what the project is or who the individual was, because I don't want to FUD anything or whatever. But like, I remember I was having a conversation with somebody who's the CEO of a very well-known DeFi protocol. And I asked that person, I was like, well, why aren't you guys doing like cross chains? Like, well, we're doing like between this EVM and that EVM. I'm like, okay, that's well and good and everything, but like, why not like why are you limiting to these specific types of chains? Why not all of crypto? And he said to me, he's like, because it's really hard. And I was like, yes, okay, yeah, all right, I get that. Oh yeah, it's very, yes, it's very hard, but that's what we need. That's what really what the need is. Like it's going like cross chain to just EVMs is just like a half solution to a larger issue, right? It's like it doesn't really feed the elephant. It just kind of like throws a couple stalks of corn at it and just like, we're good here. It's like, that's no. And so it's a very difficult problem to solve. It requires a much more complex engineering. You take on the attack surface of many different chains. Like it's just a gargantuan project for a good reason. And I can understand why a lot of people, including this individual, would just say it's just too hard, because it is very, very hard. but that's what we need, right? And so we started to say like, oh, we can do some really interesting things. We can do AMEMs, we can do lending protocols, we can do like all sorts of like, we talk about like synthetics and yield bearing synthetics. Like we just started having all these like crazy ideas like coming out of our brain. That's like, oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this. Like, and we're like, all right, let's rein it in here at this point. There's just so much we could do on top of this platform that would just like unleash liquidity. And I think for me, one of the things was like really important about using multiple protocols is that actually this is what I think DeFi 2.0 is going to be all about. Is it's going to create multiple income streams to your single point of liquidity, right? So if you add liquidity to the Bitcoin pool, you have income from block rewards, you have income from swaps, you have income from like a lending protocol, you have income from Thor savings, you have income from like all these different income streams dumping into the same like, pool of liquidity, and you're earning yield from all of these things, right? And so like at that point, like how can a DeFi like 1.0 quote unquote compete with the DeFi 2.0 if it's like, well, you're gaining income from like 5 different streams instead of 1. So the yield is going to be obviously inherently much higher and completely sustainable because it has all these incomes, like all these different sources of income to better maximize capital efficiency. Like, to me, that's what people are going to be like waking up to, because as soon as somebody builds a protocol that has like 3 sources of like revenue for that pool, I mean, why would you provide liquidity into like a single source of revenue? Like, obviously, you're not going to make as much money. Like, it becomes like a dead no-brainer. And so all liquidity is probably going to leave that kind of 1.0, well, not all, but like, a good portion of it. And it's going to fluctuate into like some provider, whether that be THORChain or somebody else. It's just going to go into this, I can make much higher yields with like multiple sources of income. And this protocol is providing that. And we might see that in the Ethereum world too. Like somebody like, Aave or whatever might create a sushi thing as well, and then combine those things together, and which may happen. Who knows? I mean, maybe that will happen once like you see the success of a multiple stream liquidity pool. But we'll see. We'll see what happens in the long term.
Yeah. They're innovating, and I think a lot of these, like whether it's sushi or Curve or even Uniswap to some extent, like they're really, they're definitely not sitting on their laurels, and DeFi, it's evolving at a pace that even if you work full time in DeFi, it's impossible to keep up with everything that's going on. But
absolutely true.
Yeah, and just the term DeFi 2.0, I feel like I just saw it for the first time less than a month ago, maybe a month ago exactly. Who was it that pioneered that term? I forget exactly, but how do you define or who popularized it or who like coined it?
Yeah, I think I saw like Crypto Bobby talking about it or something like this once on Twitter.
Yeah, and I think I've heard that like Scoopy Trooples like was one of the like early, popularizers of the term. But you've touched on it here. What does DeFi 2.0 mean to you in distinction from DeFi 1.0?
Well, I think like the community, seeing people be talking DeFi 2.0 in the context of protocol on liquidity, and there's a lot of value to this. And maybe they're right. Like who knows? I'm not a fortune teller per se, but the problem as I see it for protocol on liquidity is that it almost inevitably means that it's going to be taking liquidity or taking yield from everybody, from the non-protocol, like the human peoples, right, to make yield for itself, for the protocol on liquidity, right? And so inherently what that means is that you're going to get slightly less yield on a protocol on liquidity, AMM, than you would on, one that doesn't have that. And if you ask me, and it's just my 2 cents, that whatever DeFi 2.0 ends up being, it's probably not going to be the thing that earns less yield. It's probably not. It's probably going to be the thing that earns more yield, right? That's the thing that's going to get the adoption, right? Not the thing that makes less yield, the thing that makes more yield. Because in the end, the users of an AMM, for example, is really the LPers. Like that's your primary users. That's the one that creates the value in a sense. And so those are the people that you're trying to service more than anybody else, probably.
Do you not see it as like a marketplace balance? Like you can't have oversupply, you can't have undersupply, but there needs to be, are they not like two different wings on the same bird?
I mean, you could definitely look at it that way, and that's a completely valid way of looking at it. There are definitely two sides of that coin in a sense. I mean, and obviously people who are trading and swapping are users as well. And then obviously node operators are users, and obviously arbitrage people are also users in a sense, the different actors
Right.
in the system.
Multi-sided.
Multi-sided, right? And then you have to make sure that everybody is economically aligned to conduct their business in the way that is best for the network or the protocol as a whole. But if you can't convince LPers to come to your system, then you're not going to convince swappers either, right? Like it's just the one kind of brings the other, and so you have to appeal to the LPers first before you can appeal to the swappers in some sense. Otherwise, your pools are not going to be deep, and it's just going to become like not very practical to use that network in any real sense, right? And the more deep your pools get, especially in THORChain's case with its slip-based model, the cheaper the fees get. Right. And then there's no like lower bound of like how cheap the fees can get outside of like external things like the gas on Ethereum or Bitcoin or something like this. And so like you can just drive fees down like continuously and effectively outbid every centralized exchange and most decentralized exchanges with sufficiently deep enough capital, deep enough pools. Right. So you get to like, $100 billion in the pools, and all of a sudden the trading fees become like, extremely small for most people, right? And now you can start having to have like massive trades happening through the network and still be economically viable. So now you can see like institutional money getting involved in significant ways and passing real capital through the system once you have deep enough pools to support such a thing, and that hopefully will happen over time. So I personally don't think 2.0, DeFi 2.0 is going to be protocol on liquidity. That makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. I can understand why that would, but I think it's going to inevitably take revenue from LPers, and I don't think that's what's going to get most adoption in this space. What's going to make adoption is whatever makes more yield, and I think it makes more yield is going to be multiple income streams and a single user provided liquidity pool. That's what I think it's going to be about, if you ask me.
Awesome. And so to that end, with Thor 5, we have a lot of things to look forward to. We have synthetics, we have single side LP exposure, we have bar and lending. What are some of the things that you're most excited about with Thor 5, and how many different income streams are realistic to expect in these THORChain liquidity pools going forward?
How many? Probably, block rewards, Thor savings, lending, maybe composites possibly if we do that. Probably 4 or 5. That's a good number to start. There may be more. We could see more happening possibly if we have more protocol concepts, DeFi protocols that we think this would be very valuable. That has to do with the liquidity pools directly. You probably wouldn't see like derivatives or perpetuals directly on THORChain because doesn't deal with the actual underlying liquidity directly too much. It's more indirect, but probably about 4 or 5. I'm probably gonna guesstimate by the time we're all done with this thing, which is maybe in a year or so. Let's see, about 4 or 5. Yeah, I think I'm most excited. I think the two big ones in my mind are going to be what we call Thor savings, which is like yield-bearing synthetics. And the reason why I'm so excited about that one is because that's going to be what Anchor's doing with UST, where you get like 20% fixed rate income. You can do that, but like BYOA, bring your own asset, right? And so like if you tell people you can make 20% fixed rate interest on any asset, how does that how does that not blow people's minds? Like, I mean, that just is like 20% on Bitcoin, 20% on USDT, like whatever, it doesn't matter. It's completely agnostic in that sense. And so like that, how does that not blow people's minds entirely? I mean, usually when I tell people this, they're like, you can't do that. Like, well, how is that possible? Like, because they're very
Where's the yield come from?
skeptical.
Yeah.
Where's the yield coming from? Right. And I totally get it. I would probably say the same identical thing. I think I did say that about Anchor when I first heard, like, wait, how can they guarantee 20% fixed rate on a variable, blah, blah, blah. But you actually can do it. Actually, we do it differently the way the Anchor does it. But we basically use what's called tranches to accomplish it. But that is one thing I'm super excited because I think it's going to blow everybody's mind once it becomes live.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think I'm super excited about is the lending protocol. I mean, lending is obviously huge in DeFi. Arguably, it's the biggest thing, maybe even bigger than AMMs or right around there somewhere. So if you do lending protocols, that's huge. But if you do lending protocols that's cross-chain, that's even much more like gigantic in terms of its implications. And then they do that in a way to take a book from Scooby Trooples, right? From Alchemix. You can provide collateral into the pool and it becomes yield-bearing collateral. And then you can use that yield-bearing to pay off your loan, right? So you don't need to pay it back. Like that is something that's really cool too, right? And you can do that in a way we can even possibly even do, and I don't think anybody's doing this quite yet, is you can actually do fixed rate income, fixed rate interest on the lending protocol. That's pretty huge too, because like a lot of times on Aave or these things, like you can get a 12% loan now, and then you come back tomorrow and it's like it just like inflates to 22%, and you're just like, oh shit, I'm getting wrecked right now. I'm getting wrecked for these like massive,
it's hard to plan around that, like a variable interest rate. Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to buy a house with that mentality because it's just too long of a loan, and you have no idea
Can't
what
do
kind
it.
of exposure.
Yeah.
You don't have an idea. But I think we can do. We still need to work out some more of the math of it all. But it seems like we can do this, where we can have fixed rate interest in our lending protocol, and that's like pretty significant, right? And the reason why we can do that is because in an Aave they have a limited amount of liquidity, right? And so as soon as they give out some Ethereum as a loan or whatever, they're less on Ethereum, and so they have to adjust their interest rates to reflect that, right? But because THORChain's liquidity pools are also an AMM, and so if you give out like a Bitcoin loan, like one Bitcoin in a loan, well, now the pool is off kilter, right? It does not balance anymore. So arbitrage bots will come in a moment later and send the Bitcoin right back into the system. So it effectively has like a near infinite amount of assets to lend out, because as soon as it lends out the asset, somebody else provides the asset right back into the system like moments later, right? And so because of that, you can theoretically you can do fixed rate in a way that actually economically makes sense and still not put the system in any kind of like economic risk. We still need to evaluate that more and kind of war game that a little bit more to make sure there's no edge cases that can be manipulated or exploited or whatever. But at least at a high level, we think that's probably viable.
That's fascinating. And when these initiatives come to mind, and when you think about all these different primitives that can be built on top of THORFi, give me a sense, are these initiatives that the THORChain core team are driving forward and developing, or are these like primitives, are they going to be developed by external teams that are building like new protocols inside of or on top of THORFi?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. So most of these things were conceived by the core team, and most of them are going to be developed by the core team probably. Nine Realms is now stepping in and taking more of an active hand to contribute to the core code base, which is great to have more people involved and get more coders involved. That's fantastic. But the other thing that we've been talking about, and I don't know if this is going to happen yet, but it's kind of interesting concept, is that because I've always pushed away from smart contracting on THORChain directly. And the reason why I've kind of pushed in that direction is because I don't want to repeat the same mistakes of Ethereum, where I try to like have one chain like rule it all and like try to push the whole world of crypto through like one single, pipeline, if you want to call it that, one block space, right? Or megabytes, or that might be. It doesn't make sense to me from a long-term perspective. I think each individual DeFi protocol will probably end up having its own individual chain from the different projects. The THORChain will have its one chain, but like other projects should have their own separate chain that do separate things, like derivatives, for example, right? So I think we'll see more and more being contributed in that space. But my point is that I think I'm moving a little bit on the smart contract thing a little bit. And the reason why I'm moving on it is because I think what we can do, and this is such a cool idea. This is like kind of fascinating. Because THORChain is chain agnostic, it can have smart contracts on any chain. So, so you can deploy a smart contract on Ethereum or on Terra or on Solana or on Avalanche or like whatever, like Dfinity, like whatever, it doesn't really matter. And so you can launch a contract on there, but have access to THORChain liquidity. That means like Bitcoin and BNB and like every asset that's in the network, right? That is pretty powerful. From a throughput on THORChain's perspective, all you're doing is you're transferring LP units from a user to a smart contract on some other platform or other ecosystem, and then transferring it back and then withdrawing your liquidity. So you're only really doing the entry and the exit, right? And everything after that point or between those 2 points is happening on some other chain somewhere else in the world, and they can transact super fast on Solana because of high TPS, which has really good application. They could do slower TPS on Ethereum, but that's like really important, like that you allow developers to build on whatever platform they decide to build on, rather than trying to build a developer community around like our smart contracting language or whatever you want to call it, whether it be CosmWasm or whatever, and try to convince the world to come to us. It's a much stronger argument and a much more easier ramp if you say you don't need to come to us. You can stay on Ethereum, you can stay on Tether, you can stay on Solana, the thing that you already use and love, and just have access to Bitcoin and BNB and the rest of the crypto like space. That then becomes like kind of a no-brainer to any smart contract developers. Like, well, I can build a smart contract on Ethereum and just access ERC20s and ETH. Okay, that's cool, but wouldn't it be even better if I could access like $2 trillion of liquidity into my smart contract? Like that becomes a no-brainer.
And so the smart contract wouldn't necessarily be deployed on THORChain, but it'd be able to, through THORChain's API, be able to interact with assets across all chains, right?
Yeah. You're basically you're providing liquidity into like the Bitcoin pool, and then the network gives you like LP units, like ownership of that pool. And then you can say, all right, I want to transfer these units from my user to this other entity, which might be an OX address on Ethereum or a Bech32 address on one of the Cosmos applications, right? And so like it's just transferring LP units internally. So it's just like I send like a transfer function. It's really no different than like when you transfer Rune. Like it's just, instead of transferring Rune, you're transferring LP units, and instead of transferring it to a person, you're transferring to a smart contract on some arbitrary chain somewhere in the world that then they can do whatever the hell they want with them. I mean, then when you're done and say, okay, I want to pull out now, you tell the smart contract, give me back my LP units with my gains or losses or whatever had happened in that time, and then it just sends LP units back to your BC1 address, right, that you might have, or your Thor address or whatever it might be, and then you get your Bitcoin back, and then you can like take it out, and then like there you go, you just interface with Bitcoin on any contract in the world. And that's like pretty super powerful. That can it's a really like, it becomes like a no-brainer thing from a dev perspective.
Yeah. It's a fun brainstorm to think about what happens, what kind of possibilities are unlocked, what's the design space when you have this cross-chain technology. It can be applied to so much more than a DEX, as you mentioned, and you mentioned a few other primitives here that will evolve over time, whether it's savings, lending, or composites. Now, there's also this kind of looming kind of cliff or deadline that is planned obsolescence, right? Like the core team decentralizing and pushing off, like a decentralizing the treasury and then having like different teams run different initiatives. So when we talk about things like Thor savings or Thor lending, are these things that happen, you think, before planned obsolescence, which, if I remember correctly, is scheduled for summer 2022, so in like less than a year now? Do you think we see these primitives evolve like over the next 8 months or so?
Yeah, that's certainly my intention. So
cool.
I want to see.
That's incredible. I mean, Chad, you make that happen. You'll have a really happy community around you. But sorry to cut you off. But no. I'm blown away.
So at least how I
Continue,
look at it personally is that I want to see all those primitives out in the wild, and I want to see them out in the wild for maybe 6 months, just to give it time to bake and harden and patch, bug fix, whatever. Give it some time to be tried and true in terms of the real economics in the real world, in a sense. And then I think that's when I think planned obsolescence should happen. We've pushed out this time of like July 2022 for a while now. But obviously, the further away a timeline is, the harder it is to know like how accurate that's actually going to be. So planned obsolescence won't happen if the community or if the network or the protocols aren't ready for it, right? So the goal is to do it mid 2022. Where we actually hit that date or not is a different, that may or may not happen. The dev cycle of like how fast we like iterate and make code changes is getting slower and slower as we get further and further down. That happened as soon as we launched like multi-chain chaosnet. The dev cycle just got a lot slower, and it had to, right? For good reason. Like real money is in the system now. We can't just. It's not all just in a test environment where it doesn't really matter. We introduce a bug or whatever. Like it's a little bit different now. And then once we had these recent incidents in July, we created an entire new team like called THORChain, and that they're involved with every code change to validate it from a security perspective, right? And that's basically their full-time job to do that, and pretty much not much else. And so, but that also slows down the dev process. And so getting these features out is getting more difficult to do from an engineering perspective, from a dev cycle perspective. It doesn't mean we're not going to do them, obviously. We're still going to do them. So it's possible we won't be done by July 2022. It might be, maybe it's December. Like, I don't really know, to be honest with you. You can't keep on hacking away at it until we get it there. But I don't plan on obsolescing myself until I see the full vision of what I see this network can be, and be out there fully. And then after that point, the community can take over and and iterate and bug fix and do all those things, right? I mean, it's no different than Satoshi. Like Satoshi, him, her, they, she, whatever it is, built Bitcoin themselves more or less, and then people started to join, and then after a few years, he kind of like, all right, there's enough people understand the ideals, people understand the code base. I don't really need to be here anymore per se, and I'm just going to go ahead and step back and let the community take it over and help decentralize it further, right? And I think we need to do the same thing to follow Satoshi's kind of lead in this sense.
Yeah, and I imagine like to your point, you don't plan on obsoleting yourself. At a certain point, I imagine the degree of reward that you feel working on a project like this, seeing it out in the community, seeing it being used when it was like baking for 2-3 years, and seeing the energy from the community around it. I mean, I'd be surprised if this wasn't your life's work, and if you're working on your life's work, something so impactful in such a cutting edge frontier that's going to continue to grow. I mean, we're at a what, $2.5 or so trillion global crypto market cap now, somewhere around there. Like, it's not stopping there. We have many multiples from there to go. And THORChain is critical infrastructure, like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I was gonna say, it definitely is very rewarding to see THORChain kind of have its growth that it had and its adoption that it's had. And it's like, and what we see today is nothing to what we'll see in the future. Like, at least in my view, that's true. That's certainly very rewarding. And as somebody who's been building software for well over a decade, and I've built many things, even my GitHub has like over 100 repos in it, almost vast majority of them are original sources and not forks. The vast majority, I think, actually. I've been coding and building things nonstop for a very long period of time, and some go nowhere and some go somewhere, and this one obviously has gone somewhere by a good degree. But I'm also a person who has a lot of ideas, and so I have some other things I really want to build that are solving just as big as hair on fire problems as I perceive THORChain to be solving. And so at some point I do want to move on, and at some point I do want to build more projects in this space that I believe to be very significant and contributing to the greater humanity. And I just want to make sure that this project has had its full maturity in terms of what its vision is and its stability, security, all these things, before I think it's reasonable for me to move on to my next project.
That's super exciting to hear, and it sounds like there's the seed there for something that might grow into the THORChain mafia here, maybe before too long, and the community will eagerly await whatever you announce, and I'm sure you won't have any problems with investment or support for whatever comes next.
Hopefully. I actually already know what the thing is, and I just need to start working on the white paper at some time. But I haven't disclosed publicly what this is quite yet. But at some point I will. It'll be once I'm closer to stepping back from the project and letting others take more active roles.
That's exciting. I can relate to this notion of like creative entrepreneurial energy that it manifests with like worst case scenario, like dozens of different projects and you're just spread super thin. But best case scenario, it's like, I think Derek Sivers said this. He said, you could do it all, but just not at the same time. And so, you got to give things time to mature. And then once things mature to a certain point, especially in Web3, with decentralization and not just decentralization of like technology infrastructure, but also decentralization of governance and of code, open source code and open source contributions, you can really get projects to a place where they become like community emergent. And thus, initiatives like planned obsolescence become just a more realistic that like with in Web3 than they ever were in Web2 and centralized infrastructure and managerial kind of architecture. But all of that is kind of very forward looking. And, you and I both kind of came out of like 2017, the 2017 cycle, where there's a lot of white papers that promise the moon and deliver like a block of cheese. And THORChain has distinguished itself very clearly from that class of charlatans. It's active. You can actually, there's what, $150 million in liquidity pool, something like that. There's like somewhere between, I think there was like $7 or $8 million in somewhere between like $7 to $10 million a day in trade volume now post summer, kind of like coming back online. This thing is live today. And today was actually a very big news day for THORChain as of today. So we're recording this. It's Thursday, October 21st, 2021. And we collectively as a community celebrated a very important milestone today. What happened today and what's the significance of it? Yeah, like start there and then we'll talk a little bit about like what comes next.
Yeah, today was a big day because we restarted trading on Ethereum. So you can trade ETH and USDT and all these ERC20s and all that kind of stuff. That was the ERC20s was the threat that the chain had a couple months ago, where that's where the exploits came from. And so we as the core devs wanted to leave that chain for last, just to give as much time as possible to as many people as possible to validate that implementation, that security, all these things. So we started with BNB being the first one, and then BNB is like the easiest one to do it. That was one we've been doing for the longest period of time with single chain chaos net. It's the easiest one to secure because there's no arbitrary code execution. There's instant finality. There's no like reorgs you have to worry about or anything like this. It's from a security perspective, it's like BNB is like relatively easy, right? And so we kind of went that direction. And so restarting Ethereum was just kind of the last kind of chain to get restarted. And we all kind of celebrated that happening. And for the most part, it was very clean, very smooth, except for a little Midgard bug we had to deal with. But, that squash that thing in about an hour or two, and carry on with our lives, Very soon we'll be enabling adding and removing liquidity on the Ethereum chain, or Ethereum-based assets, probably in the next 24 hours or so. That'll be big. And then the last final kind of milestone to hit to come totally back up is churning the network and kicking out some validators and bringing in some new ones and churning all the funds from all the old Asgard vaults to the new Asgard vaults. That'll be like kind of the final straw, if you want to call it that. And at that point, the network's fully back on, trading, LPing, churning, all these things, and fully functional. So I'm definitely really, really excited to get to that point. It's been a long time coming and a lot of work to get there.
I can imagine. We were talking about this before we hit record, but I just, spoke on behalf of the community and saying, thank you and the whole core team, because that period through summer, late June into July, it was stressful it was not even stressful. It was not encapsulate what it was. It was painful and it was emotional and it was like, and it was public and it was like, and if you're like me, I mean, shit, you were way more than me. Like we all have economic exposure to THORChain, and I realized then that not only do I have economic exposure, but I also have like social exposure and emotional exposure to like our identities are wrapped up in this thing. Like people know me, let alone you, as like
of course.
The guy, like involved with THORChain. And so when all this is happening, like family members, we're reaching out. And so like, needless to say, you guys worked your asses off and continue to. And so big thank you from the community. I hope you feel appreciated. I know that sometimes communities can be thankless, but I hope you feel appreciated.
Oh no, I definitely feel appreciated. Like this community is, obviously this community is absolutely amazing. Like y'all have like just diamond hands holding through, like you were saying, like all that stress, and that like everybody's got a little bit of PTSD from, the last few months, right? Reasonably so. Like we're all kind of in that boat in a sense, right? And so y'all have just straight on diamond hands. It's almost like when Mt. Gox happened on Bitcoin, like I think it was 2013 or whatever it was, like that was like diamond hands time. Do you know what I mean? Like there was a lot of people in crypto and Bitcoin just like, I'm out. This is stupid, blah, 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 and they just left. But there was a lot of people who didn't. And like, and just the project, of Bitcoin just like kept on keeping on, like even after this like massive thing that created so much doubt about Bitcoin, whether it could survive or whether or not it could, ever be as strong as it was. And like, to me, like this is very similar to that in the sense that it created a lot of doubt for some people in the industry, and for some people, they moved on. For some people, they stayed in. They kept their diamond hands, and they kept on holding their Roonies, and a lot of them picked up even more in that kind of price movement down that we had like in July or whatever it was, or August. But like, you all are like super super like the amount of support that I feel from the community on a daily basis is actually astrologically huge. Obviously you get, naysayers, obviously you get people, messaging me and let's say not make the nicest statements. Hell, there's even a guy at the mainnet conference who like called me out in the audience while on stage to say something very, very, very not nice. I'll say that. And so it can happen in person. It can happen on, the Twitter sphere. It can happen in Discord, but the vast majority, you guys have been like super behind the project. And like, I completely appreciate everybody sticking around and just continues to support the product. Like that was crucial for me to like keep on like putting my energy to just get that support from you all.
I love to hear that. And absolutely, like this THORChain community, it's unique even amongst crypto. To be into crypto or DeFi amongst like the broader mainstream society is already kind of punk rock. It's a little bit contrarian. It's increasingly less contrarian, it's increasingly more mainstream, but it is still, you're a little bit contrarian in that. And then to be into THORChain amongst the broader crypto community is very punk rock amongst punk rock. And I went to a conference and you probably experienced this. I mean, how many people were you in Lisbon at that conference just now, or were you in?
I was in London for one conference and New York for another one.
And in mainnet. And when you say that you work with THORChain, what percentage of people, some people really get it, and then I feel like a lot of people still don't really get it. Like what percentage would you say when even at a crypto conference, like it's not like THORChain, you can't take it for granted that people know what it is.
Yeah, you know what? I remember I went to the mainnet conference, and even here, I'm currently in London at the moment, and I went to like a speakers conference, like a speakers, not conference, but speakers meetup right before the conference started. Yeah, dinner, drinks thing, or whatever it was, like a sponsored speakers meetup. And I was like chit chatting with like a bunch of random people. But like I was actually, a lot of people did not actually know what THORChain was. Like hadn't heard of it, right? And to be honest, I was a little bit surprised considering, it's one of the top DeFi projects, and it's not like a small cap. It's like well over 2 billion, right, or whatever the number is now. So it's not like it's really like obscure or anything like this. But I was surprised how many didn't know it. And I was just, but the people I did meet were like super into it. Like the people who had heard of it were like huge fans. Like I met somebody who worked for WBDC, and I'm not gonna say who that person was, but that person was like, that person was just like, you are replacing me, and I love it. That's what he said to me. He's like, you are replacing what I do, and I absolutely want you to do it. Which was hysterical.
That's awesome. That's Ren Protocol, right?
WBDC. There's somebody who works for WBDC, and that was absolutely like hysterically funny, right?
Ren is different. Ren is different.
Ren is different. Ren's a different project, but like it's funny to me how like it's actually not as known as people think it is. It's not to me, at least. I thought it was more well known. So I learned more about how unknown the project is, which makes me think that like just the community is not even close to the size that it could be or should be, right? Because not enough people know about this particular project and how significant it is and what its goals are and these kinds of things. And of course, I talked to people about it, told them about the project, and told them to check it out and that kind of stuff. But it's hard to do that in those circumstances because you're like, oh, I work on THORChain. They're like, never heard of it. And I'm like, oh, cool. It's like a cross-chain DEX, blah, blah, blah. And like their immediate thought is like, ooh, a coin that's isn't something I've heard about before. Therefore, it must be a shit coin. You can see that kind of like light go off in their heads. Like, it must be a shit coin if I've never heard of it. You know what I mean? Basically. And so you have to kind of get through that part of it. But like, honestly, like you can't move from shitcoin mentality to like, blue chip mentality, like in a conversation. It generally takes weeks, if not months of research, and this kind of thing. Like even the people at like Shapeshift, who are now like huge fans of the project, they've basically ripped out their backend and installed THORChain. Like it took them a while, right? Like I remember I was talking to Michael Perkland, who's a CIO over there, and he was just saying, when I first heard THORChain, I thought it was a shit coin. But then like as soon as I started to learn about its economic model, like its technology, like all these things, it's like it really, now he's a humongous fan of the project, and he jokingly told me the other day that like if I was looking for a job in 2017 and THORChain was there, like I would have not taken the job at Shapeshift, and I would have taken the job at THORChain, because like what you guys are doing is like the thing that we need to have in the community. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it is about, we need to get more exposure for sure. I learned that in the conferences that not enough people know about the project, so we need to get more people tweeting, more people talking.
It's crazy.
And the funny thing is THORChain has no marketing team, right? There's no like marketing budget. Like there's no like, there's nobody out there. Like the closest thing is me just kind of doing things like this, which is like, not something I'm even actively like looking to do. It just kind of, people just ask me to do something. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Like, it's not like I'm like emailing people in the world, like YouTubers and like whatever, and like, hey, I can join you. Like, no, it's actually, they every one of these interviews I've ever done, they've always reached out to me and said, hey, are you interested in coming onto my podcast or whatever? I'm like, yeah, if you want to learn more about it, happy to educate and explain and all these things. But like there is no marketing whatsoever, and so like it's at the same time I can't be too surprised about the like this idea that like not as many people know about as they should, because we haven't been out there just like pushing and and like paying for articles on Cointelegraph and like these things that a lot of other projects do. We just don't do those things, and honestly, we don't really care to do those things.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think that THORChain has a great community where some of these things are becoming emergent, and then THORChain does a great job supporting those creators, supporting those kind of emergent community internal marketers. Things like Chi Capital, Chris from Grassroots, Thor Noob, and Runebase. Runebase is funded by the THORChain Treasury. And so, and I think that's honestly, it's the way to do it. You're not hiring mercenaries, you're enabling missionaries. And, we have like a more emotional and intellectual and economic kind of interest in THORChain than you would get from a pay for play influencer or media piece.
Yep. Yeah. In all those cases that you mentioned, like you being a good example of that, it's like nobody walked up and just said like, hey, we want to pay you to do a podcast. You're just like, I love this project. This is so cool. I have this really neat idea. Hey, Treasury, will you support me? And we're like, yeah, I think it's a great idea. Here you go. Here's some money. Here's some rupees, right? Like it's not so much like a concerted effort to like hire a PR firm to manage some sort of long-term marketing ploy or plan or any of this stuff. It's just like individuals from the community, just like, I love this idea and I want to contribute. And here's what way that I can contribute through these actions, whether it be a podcast like you're doing or a news article like you do, or maybe it's like some tweeting, maybe it's about some imagery, or like who knows, like whatever people want to do, that's great. And that they just support the project that way, just by doing what they do and do what they love for a project that they love. And it's a very different mentality than trying to like, let's go to like New York City's Fifth Avenue and find like the biggest PR firm on the row and like pay them $100 million to run some sort of campaign. No, we don't do that. We have no interest in doing that.
Yeah. It's all of these things that make THORChain what it is today, but it will have its like, I don't know what you want to call it, Solana moment. And, the role that it plays, the execution from the core team, including yourself, and the important education that's there is like how to provide liquidity, and the rest of it, because it's really for you guys, it's the liquidity providers. And then really, like, honestly, a lot of it's going to come from THORChain exchanges, but a lot of this trade volume is going to come from integrations with like Shapeshift and Trust Wallet, where, users aren't even going to know that they're leveraging THORChain liquidity pools on the back end. That flywheel is like, I don't know, it's not necessarily like, there's like a meme joke on crypto Twitter that like, $100 rune or $500 rune is programmed. It's not like literally programmed, but like if this does what it says it's going to do, then with Rune's deterministic value and economic model being what it is, like this, like the Solana moment or whatever moment you want to call it, like it's extremely it's I mean, we're optimistic. I'll just put it that way. It's an exciting time for the whole ecosystem. Yeah,
absolutely. So in general, I tried not to talk about Rune's price and future movements and this kind of stuff, because I don't want to get I don't want to be seen as somebody who's like shilling in a sense. I always want to see somebody who's educating and, explaining and educating to people have a good understanding of what it is we do and why we do it, and talk about the vision of it rather than try to like say number go up. I always try to steer that in that direction. But in some senses, you're right in terms of that if THORChain becomes a thing that I hope it to be, which is effectively become the biggest cryptocurrency exchange on the planet, bar none, including bigger than Binance or Coinbase. That's my intention, is to get to that place. Then it becomes the most liquid, network on the planet, and it becomes the most traded coin in the world. Effectively becomes Rune, almost inherently so it becomes true. And it means that we have the total amount of liquidity we have in the pools is, I think, will one day be astronomically large. Like, there's no reason it can't get to hundreds of billions, if not trillions, in the future at some point. And I really am thinking, I am designing, architecting, coding with that mentality of like, how do we get it to the pools to be 100 billion, a trillion, and so forth and so on, in a way that it makes complete sense from an economic perspective. And so we keep that in mind. We're gunning for that, right? That's what we want to see happen. So we're definitely, shooting for that kind of star in a sense. And I don't see why it's not reasonable or feasible. It's completely, to me, it's not even like, it's just obvious. It's not even like questionable in the sense of like, could it happen or could not happen? Like, I guess, but like, to me, it's just like, if all the ducks are in a row, and the network continues to churn, and the network continues to produce more blocks, and and the economics push for it, there's no reason why it wouldn't happen, right? I mean, in the end, like, are people going to want to use centralized exchanges over decentralized exchanges? And the answer is no. That's pretty clear to me, because nobody wants to sign up and give the personal information they don't have to. And people want to be able to trade now, not like in 2 weeks from now. Or trade and then like not be able to pull your assets out of the network to have your own assets. Like, that is, nobody wants that. And we use it today because we have to use it, because it's like our only choice, until THORChain came along and said, now you have another choice. You can go ahead and get your Bitcoin, get your ETH, get your BNB, and you can do it now within like a few seconds or minutes, depending upon what assets you're talking about, instead of waiting for like weeks on end and then like taking a picture with your like passport up and like, record a little video that says, my name is Chad Barraford,
and your social security number and everything. Yeah.
Here's a picture of my firstborn child. And like, no, like, we don't need to do these things. We only do it because of technical limitations, historically speaking, like back in 2017 when I first got into the space. But today, no, you don't need it at all. We have the technology, we have the cryptography, we have all the things that are required to make this thing happen without those things. And so people aren't going to choose to use those things except for maybe the fiat, right? But still, like, even like, I was talking to Binance a while back, and like they were saying that like very, very small percentage of their trades is fiat related. Most of it is crypto to crypto. Very few of it is fiat to crypto or crypto to fiat. So like, most of the trade volume is on spot trading on crypto to crypto assets. And if that's what you're trying to do, like, THORChain's got what you need in droves to get the best settlement layer in all of crypto, right? And so, to me, it just makes logical sense that the result is we have $100 billion or half a trillion dollars in liquidity in the liquidity pools.
Absolutely. And maybe from a concept standpoint, from an execution standpoint, and from an economic design standpoint, all of those things line up. And this will have to be a conversation, I guess, out of respect for your time, because we're coming up on the hour here. But there is a second part to this conversation, which we'll talk about network security. And that might be like, I think that might have been the thing that like I personally, and maybe others in the community, might have just taken for granted. Like, oh, like, of course it's going to work for every reason that you just mentioned. And then it turns out like THORChain, more than any other thing, like more than any other project out there, it seems, has just like all this surface area for complexity and potential exploits and attack vectors.
True.
And I think that is an episode, a podcast worthy of its own conversation, and also all of the initiatives that have spun up in the wake of the summer exploits to help harden and strengthen the network, I think are absolutely worth diving into. But that's our hour here, and I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got a lot of real work to be doing, and this is just kind of, so I really appreciate you taking the time to jam with me for an hour here on this. Where can people go to follow you or learn more about you?
Well, I would encourage people to not follow me.
Okay, don't follow Chad, y'all.
I don't matter
no
in the long term. Don't follow me. Don't follow me. I would encourage people to follow the project, right? Follow the key members in the community of the project. I don't want people to be following me in a sense because I don't really matter, right? Like I don't want to become like the Jesus figure of THORChain or something like this. Like as you see like Hutchinson of Cardano or like Justin Sun of Tron or Vitalik of Ethereum. Like I don't want to be that guy. You know what I mean? So I don't want people to follow me per se. I want to be the conduit to help explain and understand the THORChain protocol and how it functions, how it works, why it works, how it can reshape the entire industry of crypto, but focus on the value proposition of that rather than me as an individual. And like, you know, like don't even, if you want to follow me, you can follow me. I am on Twitter. I do have a Twitter account, but like I wouldn't encourage people to do it outside of just curiosities.
Cool. So what are the best resources to learn more about THORChain?
Yes. THORChain.org is the main website. We have @THORChain is on Twitter. You can learn about a bunch of things there. Docs.THORChain.org is a lot of documentation of how the whole thing works. We can do another episode at some point in the future where we actually go into the depths of like how it actually functions and how it actually works underneath the hood. And then we can do that, make another episode and do something like that. But if you want to learn more about it, that's a great place to start. And you feel free to ask questions in the Discord. Ask, pull in the community to help understand and learn about this protocol and how it works, why it's important, how it actually accomplishes the goal of true decentralization, and how it accomplishes the goal of giving people freedom and liberty and self-sovereignty in this space, and how it contributes to that. But THORChain.org and @THORChain on Twitter and the Discord. It's a great place to start.
Awesome. Chad, thank you so much for spending time with us here. We really appreciate the work that you're doing, the energy and the love that you're putting into THORChain, and we support you all the way. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anytime.
Bye, buddy.